Hey there, Craig. Thanks so much for joining me. It's morning for you in Sydney and kind of late afternoon for me here in New York.
Yeah, the time zone's a bit tricky here. We've been doing a bit of international promo on the film, and it's always a tough one with the other side of the world to everybody.
Yes, well, when you're into a long distance relationship as well, it's always a little strange when it's, morning for one person and in evening for someone else. I've had that experience. But yeah, congratulations on Lonesome. I really enjoyed revisiting it and seeing it for a second time. But before we get onto the film itself, I wondered if you give me a little bit of an insight into the draw for you of filmmaking as a storytelling form. And I know you have a background as a hairdresser initially, and then you kind of got involved
Yeah,
creatively as a kind of set designer or production design in theatre, didn't you? But where did sort of
I
film come in?
did. Yeah. It came in kind of politically for me. I was kind of involved for quite a long time years ago in the decriminalization movement for gay people. Like I'm from Queensland. When I came out, it was still illegal to be gay. So that was a kind of big motivation for me to tell queer stories, was just the lack of them, the lack of them here in Australia, and also the illegality of our very being. So that was a draw. And it kind of still is. I still like I'm still in film to tell queer stories primarily. That's the thing that motivates me when I write stuff. That's what I want to write about, you know. So
Yeah.
that's yeah. And then yes, I took this very strange path by I did a hairdressing apprenticeship when I finished school because I came out and that's what that's what you're supposed to do. And then I went from that into working in styling and production design in theater, and it was kind of there. I kind of had this kind of crossroads where I was like, oh, do I follow that, or do I go and make my own stories, and decided to go to film school, and yeah, it sort of started there.
Yeah. So with Lonesome, I believe like your two central characters, Tib and Casey, kind of started out life in two separate screenplays or drafts of screenplays, and I just wondered what kind of
Yeah,
excited you about the idea of putting them together in the same movie.
I just really liked the characters. They were both quite dynamic. And then I met up with the producers from Breathless, and we were talking about doing. They wanted to do a slate of indie projects, and they were just fishing for ideas for stuff. And I had both of those ideas, but they were kind of half formed. They were half written. I hadn't really nailed them yet, and it was just an idea. It just was like, what happens if these two collide? What would that look like? And it kind of just the script just kind of flew out of that really quite easily. I mean, it's a quite a minimal script. It's a minimal story. It's not a big plotty film. It's more about kind of nuance and the little cracks in these people's masks. That's what drove me when I was writing it.
Yeah, there's a lot going on emotionally, isn't there?
Yeah,
But that's interesting. It seems to make a lot of sense that because you're saying about sort of like two worlds colliding. Because I mean, essentially, that's what happens when we meet someone as well, isn't it? The two, and opposites attract and all that all that kind of stuff. But just in terms of we're kind of depending on whether we were actively looking for a relationship or we might just be minding our own business, and then suddenly someone with their own sort of sphere comes along and they come together. So the fact that the characters came that way,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Especially in Australia, where I mean, it's such a big country with lots of spaces, and people who live in the regions um are very removed from the urban, queer experience, which is quite different. I mean, I know that is a story that we've sort of seen before, but it's still a very relevant story. It's still a story that resonates with a lot of people who have that experience. There are still a lot of country queers coming to the city. You know, we've had a lot of those moments in Q&As actually where people have gotten quite emotional about seeing that story told, because that is their experience and that they relate to it very personally.
Yeah, because actually a lot of urban set stories tend to be, you know, people that are just very used to the city and they, you know, all kind of sophisticated and nothing's kind of new to them. But obviously, yeah, he's an outsider coming in. And it's a really stunning central performance from Josh Lavery. Can tell me a little bit about finding him, sort of, I don't know how long you maybe had to prep before you started production and then working with him in the film. It feels like a really fearless performance. He just sort of throws himself into it.
Yeah, he really did. It was funny. I was trolling. I really wanted the cast to be as queer as possible and find people from the community, because it was not that I think that, you know, straight actors can't play queer characters. I mean, I think they can, but I think we were delving into such a specific part of our community world that it just made sense that people would get it. They would understand it. So I was trolling every means possible. It was during lockdown in Sydney when we were casting, so we couldn't really go out and meet people, but I was trolling Grindr, I was trolling Instagram, I was trolling the internet. I actually found Josh through a short documentary piece that he had done talking about growing up in the country and his own experiences, because that is very much his experience. And then moving to Melbourne, and then I got in touch with him via Instagram, and funnily enough, his Instagram got booted the next day because he posted some racy content and got banned. So we kind of lost contact, but fortunately, we had exchanged names and stuff, and we got back in touch. But we didn't have a lot of time to rehearse. We did a lot of stuff via Zoom, just chatting about it. And then Josh, I think, came up about 3 weeks before we shot, and we really dived into it then. And really, really, a lot of that rehearsal time was about focusing on just the physicality of the character more than anything, and the characters and Daniel and Josh coming together to just build a relationship and build rapport. It was pretty fearless, and Josh was very excited about the film. Like, he was very, you know, keen to put honest representations of our sex and sexuality on screen. That was something that was exciting to me as well, because, you know, I really wanted people to feel comfortable with the material, because it's pretty racy content.
Yeah.
And it was there on the page. Like, people read the script, and it was spelled out what you were seeing and what was going on, so that no one was ever gonna, you know, read a line of big print that just said they make love. You know, it was very clear that there were emotional beats happening within sex scenes, and this stuff was going to be, you know, as much as possible, quite tangible on the screen.
Yeah. And it's beautifully orchestrated because, as I say, it does feel very real. It feels like unapologetic. And, you know, it's great to look at, but there's also, as you say, there's always things going on too, which I think just enriches it.
Yeah, I mean, that was important. I think, you know, like, often we see a sex scene in a film and it's just a montage of body parts and movement, but it really, I really wanted to explore the dynamics of those situations. Like, even in a random hookup, there is some kind of exchange happening, you know, emotionally as well, or some power play, or some, you know, some tension. You know, that was important to play with.
Yeah. And yeah, you touched on this a little bit, but I just wanted to hear a little bit more about what happened when you put. So did you cast Josh first, and then Daniel came afterwards? So what kind of excited you about putting them together, and, you know, what did you sort of see happening on screen when you did do that?
Well, like, I when I cast them, I cast them just because they understood the material so well, and understood the characters, and just brought all these exciting ideas to it. Daniel was based in Sydney during the lockdown, so we were able to catch up and go for walks in the park and talk about the character, and they really understood Tib and the mask that he's wearing. And then that bringing them together, I guess it was really just about finding an ease between them. So the thing that I really loved watching about them is that they bounced off each other really beautifully, and they kind of loved each other the moment they met each other, which was great, because I was kind of nervous because it was, I'd been talking to them both separately during pre-production, and then when they came together, I was like, oh god, I hope they actually get on. But they did, like a house on fire, and were really supportive of each other and really protective of each other, which was great. It was really important, especially when you're doing kind of material that's pretty intimate, or it's pretty raw. So it was important that they were very connected, and they were like a little unit of support for each other, which was beautiful.
Yeah. And what were some of the things that you kind of wanted to explore? I don't know how consciously, but maybe wanted to explore about the gay scene, maybe specifically in Sydney, because I lived in, it's quite a long time ago now, nearly 20 years ago, but and it still felt like, oh yeah, this recognizable to me as this kind of Sydney gay scene in a lot of ways, even though it was a while ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was interested in, I don't know, whenever we see the gay scene in Sydney represented on screen, often it's very glossy, it's very eastern suburbs, it's very the Darlinghurst gay ghetto kind of vibe, which is great, fantastic. But I just kind of wanted to look at, outside of that, go a little further out into the western, and look at those characters that maybe aren't part of that, glossy rainbow footpath community, or like where are the other queers in on the edges of the suburbs kind of thing, that sort of space. That was something that was interesting to me. Yeah, that was probably my most Sydney thing. I kind of wanted to look at Sydney in a way that we didn't normally see Sydney. I think it's more rooftops and back alleys than beautiful shots of the opera house. That kind of thing that we are pretty used to seeing.
Yes, I was gonna say, I don't think we see the bridge or the opera house at all, right?
We did in a shot. Our
Oh.
DOP was Dean Francis was very furious at me because I cut it out.
Oh, I was gonna say, I don't think I was right. Okay, he wanted. Yeah. Why did he want to end it?
We had a really beautiful shot. He just, it was a beautiful shot.
It was very nice. Okay,
yeah.
And talking about cinematographer Dean Francis and the look of the film. I mean, partly because of Casey's state of mind, and also Tips to a degree as well. There's a kind of melancholy vibe to the film, though there's hope there and it's not depressing. So if I say melancholy, you still want to watch it. But part of what lifts that, I think, for me anyway, as a viewer, was the really stunning visuals. And I just wondered what your sort of approach to the look of the film was, and any sort of references you might have had for Dean, for your cinematographer.
Yeah, we looked at a lot of stuff, actually. We looked at a lot of old classic westerns, and just looked at the way that they handled landscapes and put solitary cowboy figures in them, and we wanted to riff on that a bit and put that in an urban environment. So there's a lot of that playing out. So you get these really beautiful landscape moments in the film as well, even though it's quite urban. But then we were looking at 80s, 90s queer camp cinema quite a bit as well, and just like developing a color palette. We had this evolving color palette that sort of goes from quite country and naturalistic and still really a bit saturated, but then it moves into this more neon hyper kind of city palette, which was a nice progression we really like. And then we were also looking at the Italian neo-realists, and the way that they shot in the street, and the way that they often put the camera in a place where people were unaware of it. So you get this kind of vibrancy that you don't get when you shut down streets, or you're really visible. we did a lot of that, and I think that gives it a real organic kind of energy in some of those cityscapes themes. It was funny though, because we're often shooting on a really long lens and the camera was way away and Josh was, a shirtless cowboy, windscreen wiping, cars in the street, and people had no idea that he was in a film.
So did you kind of do that guerrilla style, the washing of the windows? Was he really just doing that and getting some change?
Well, we had our cars.
Oh,
The ones
okay.
that he was working with, and but we didn't stop anything. It was the world was just happening around him. I think a couple of people did ask him to wash their windscreens, but
Yeah, I mean,
weren't
who
our
wouldn't?
cars.
Yeah, who wouldn't if you
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
oh yeah, I have to ask you about the hat. Well, I remember because I feel like the film wouldn't be the same without the hat. And was that in your sort of original draft? How sort of early did the hat come along? And yeah, tell me about the hat.
I mean, the hat was always in there. I mean, the hat's kind of like I'm originally from Western Queensland, and I have family members who are cannot be removed from their hats, and I kind of wanted to play with that. I mean, the hat was a mission though. Like when we were looking for costumes, it was just after the first major lockdown, and there hadn't been a lot of stuff coming into the country because the import export sort of situation was really bad. So there was a real shortage of hats, to use. So I was trawling every vintage Western shop looking for the hat that had to be the right hat, and eventually we found it, and was like, yes, this is the one. But yeah, it was important because it's kind of iconic, and the character is such an iconic kind of cowboy, so we needed to find the right hat that looked great on Josh.
So
And
and
it helped Josh. Like I think the moment Josh put the hat on, it was just kind of like, Casey was there.
and was there just one hat? You didn't have any stunt hats or anything like that?
No, there
Yeah.
was only one hat, and it was terrifying because the hat went through a lot.
Yes, I know exactly. I think I know what film sets can be like. And did Josh get to keep it, or have you got it? Who's got the hat now?
It's here. It's actually in my place on a hat stand.
See, if I'd known
Saving
that.
it. I always kept it in case we had to do reshoots and stuff. But yeah, it's just now it's like a bit of a little Casey shrine in the hallway on a hat stand.
Yes, yeah. Well, if I'd known that, I might have asked you to wear it, not to sound too obsessed about the hat. um, and yeah, thinking about your locations, like I said, I lived in Sydney for a little while, and I have some family there. I wondered with the nude beach scene, was that Watson's Bay? Is it Lady Jane, Lady Grey Beach?
It's not that one. It's
No.
a little Konglong Beach at La Perouse, which is another very iconic queer. It's an unofficial nude beach. It's actually not a nude beach officially, but it kind of is, and it's belonged to the gays forever. So it's a bit of a little Easter egg for people who know Sydney. But yeah, very similar to Lady Jane that you're talking about. Similar kind of vibe. Yeah, there's a few of those places we use some very specific queer spaces as locations because we wanted that, wanted to load it up. Actually, and I actually used to go to that beach all the time in summer, and that's where I wrote a lot of the script, sitting under that rock, just with my iPad writing away.
Oh, that's amazing.
So I knew it was beautiful. Yeah.
Yes, no, it is really stunning. Yeah, was with the rocks there that kind of made me. Yeah, that threw me a bit, made me, and I haven't been to that one. But did you have any guys there who were a little disgruntled that when you were filming because you were kind of getting in the way of their cruising, or?
The moment the camera came out, people kind of scattered. So we were kind of okay. No one seemed to be bothered.
No, I'm sure. Yeah, if anyone was, I'm sure they made up for lost time anyway when you were gone. Yeah, that's really yeah, a beautiful scene, and say it's a different side of Sydney and shows off. It's not Bondi Beach. It's the queer sort of experience. Oh, and we also get to see Stonewall, which if people don't know Sydney, that's such a famous queer bar that's I don't know, been there for decades, isn't it? I'm not quite sure how long.
Yeah, yeah.
You remember sort of going there for the first time when you arrived in Sydney? Was that kind of one of the first queer places you would have gone to, or were there other places then?
Actually, I'm a bit older than that, so I can remember when it opened.
Right.
But
Was that in the
but
90s? When did it
you
open?
know, but yeah, it would have been a little, maybe the early noughties or late 90s,
Right.
possibly. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, it's an iconic bar. You know, a lot of performance happens there. It's like one of the places that still does a lot of drag shows. You know, there's fewer and fewer of those spaces in Sydney. Um, but they were great. They were super supportive of the project, and we really wanted to use that space because it is so iconic, and it's great. It's a great looking space as well.
And I know you mentioned, yeah, you were kind of actively looking for queer performers for your two leads, but were you also looking for queer folks in the supporting roles as well?
Yeah, as much as possible, and it's tricky. It's like casting queer actors is actually kind of hard because quite often the casting agents are unaware of people's sexuality, and it's not something you can kind of ask in a casting situation because it's kind of like a job interview. So I was trying same sort of thing, every means possible to try and find people, and we ended up reaching out to a lot of people. There's a lot of people in the film who aren't necessarily from an acting background, but they are in working in some form of art or a creative process with using kind of queer material to ground their work. Like Gareth Ernst, who's a really amazing painter who I love, who does a lot of really amazing line art and very 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 gay imagery. And I approached him because I really love his work, and he's just a really amazing enigmatic character, and he sort of ended up being one of the bears in the basement, later and later in the film. So I pulled people from all over the place, and then there were some people that I worked with before, like Ian Roberts, who plays Pietro, was in my film Teenage Kicks, and we did a short film together years ago, and we just really like to work together. It's really a nice working relationship. So I wrote that part with him in mind, and he was into it. He loved it. He's really into the idea of playing a character who is a little bit sketchy and a little bit had some stuff happening under the surface as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a real mix, all kinds of queer folk in the film, all
Yes.
over the place.
Yes, his character's sort of very concerned with the sort of cleaning the place afterwards as well, isn't he? I like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, why was that sort of that's something that we don't really see on screen much, that kind of that scene, isn't it, that he's in? Was that something why were you so
yeah. I mean, I really wanted to. I was really looking at the experience of coming to Sydney and negotiating the kind of gay sex landscape in all its forms. So whether it be about relieving boredom or trying to find a connection or brutalizing yourself because you feel like you deserve it, or just a transaction, all of that stuff. So there's a lot of different moments that happen throughout the film in that way. And that's a pretty big moment towards the end of the film. Probably won't say too much about it because it's a
yeah.
bit of a spoiler, but yeah.
And we hear kind of the grinder sound go off quite a lot throughout the film. And I think it's just yeah, touching on that is kind of a reminder of, I don't know, sex can be like very accessible, easily available, but that intimacy often isn't so much. But who knows, maybe you can find intimacy in unexpected places or through these things.
Yeah, yeah. It was great that Grinder came aboard actually and gave us permission to use the sound and the because we were initially talking about we started making a kind of fake our own kind of fake app for the film, but there's something so iconic about that Grinder chirp, that I really wanted to use it if I could, and they were supportive of it and came on. Actually, they've been great through through the release of the film as well. They've really kind of gotten behind it, which is nice.
That's good. And I think, you know, a lot of folks watching it will, you know, when they hear that sound, it will sort of, you know, stir something in them, probably bring back some
Well,
memories.
that's the thing. It's kind of like it's such a specific sound, and like, and when you, especially when you're playing to an audience of gay men, like when we played at Frameline in San Francisco, it was like the moment that chirp happens, it's like, oh, everyone knows what's going on.
Yeah.
You know, just very.
Probably got some
very
people checking their phones thinking they hadn't silenced them as well. So I've got one final question for you, Craig, and it's for your favorite piece of LGBTQ plus culture. So it could be a film or a TV series, book, artwork, musical, play, any kind of culture, or a person who identifies as LGBTQ plus. Just someone or something that's had an impact on you and kind of resonated with you over the years, and why.
That's a big one. I mean, in terms of a film, I think the film that I often go back to and rewatch and really love is Happy Together, the Wong Kar-wai film with Leslie Cheung and Tony Leung. It's just so magic and beautiful, but it's kind of a love story, but it's kind of an end of love story. It's quite tragic and quite moving, and it's shot by Australian cinematographer Christopher Doyle, whose work I'm obsessed with. I love him. So that's a fairly iconic piece of work that, I mean, if I had made that film, I would be happy to retire and never make another film. I mean, it's just beautiful. If people haven't seen it, check it out.
And I think it chimes nicely with Lonesome too. I mean, it might make a nice double bill for people.
It would, yeah, it would.
Yes. So we recommend that now that the film's available, yeah, on demand in digital. People can have their own little evening double bill at home of those two movies.
They're a little festival, yeah.
Yes. We should think of a wine to pair with it too. So, Craig Boreham, thanks so much.
I feel like Lonesome is a whiskey movie.
Yes, well, exactly. Yeah. Yes, you've got to be on theme, exactly. Well, Craig Boreham, thanks so much, and congratulations again on Lonesome.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.